Here's why everybody's quitting your worship team. I made a video about 2 years ago now, maybe, kind of along this topic. I think it was called 5 Startling Reasons That People Quit Worship Teams. Great title. In that video, I gave 5 reasons that I thought people leave worship teams, and then I got a bunch of comments on that video, and it was a bunch of people saying, this is why I quit my worship team. And so I thought we'd take it straight from the horse's mouth, straight from the people in the trenches who have quit worship teams on why they have quit their worship teams. So let's take a look at why some people quit worship teams. I feel it's worth acknowledging that another reason people leave is because they aren't being valued. Unfortunately, in some churches, leadership is an issue and have a bad habit of playing favoritism. They use some people more than others and make others feel less important and unvalued. I, as a worship volunteer and intern for a season, I've been on both sides of this. It's a terrible feeling. I started with this one because it was probably the most common reason that I saw was some form of people not feeling valued on their worship team. And I think it took a few different forms. One of them was like this comment was talking about, which said, they aren't scheduled as much, they aren't used as much as other people. And I even get this on my Real Talk episodes, my Q&A series, where it's like, I'm not being scheduled as much as this other person on my worship team. And therefore, I feel like I'm not a valuable member because they get to lead songs, every week, and I only get to lead a song maybe once a month or something. And that is like a really difficult balance because I think that there is definitely some truth in those comments, and I don't want to invalidate that because I've definitely seen that happen on worship teams before, where it's like, they're like these second-class worship team members, and it's really a shame because we want everybody on our worship team to feel like a valuable member of the team. And maybe, I guess, since I'm a worship leader and not a worship team member, although I'm a member on my worship team, but I'm also the leader of my worship team, maybe I can just provide some alternative perspective for people to think about in contrast to this. Once again, not invalidating what they've gone through, because that's definitely a problem that I've seen on worship teams. But I think sometimes we think that if we aren't scheduled as much as somebody else, or we only get to sing harmony on songs and we rarely get to lead a song, I think your worship team leader isn't thinking this person is less valuable than somebody else. They're just thinking this person has a different role than someone else on the team. And maybe we need to think about how long has that other person been leading worship for, and if they've been leading worship for 10 years and you just started this year and your worship team leader is working with you to develop you, which they should definitely be doing. If you've only been leading for a year, you're not going to lead as many songs as the person who's been leading for 10 years because they have more experience than you, and your worship team leader trusts that person more because they've had more time with them. So I don't think that we can equate the amount that we get to lead songs with how valuable we are. And I don't know, I don't really want this video to go that direction where I'm just defending the other side, but I just felt like that needed to be said. Your value on the worship team is not wrapped up in how many songs you get to lead. You are still a valuable member of the team, whether you're singing lead on a song or you're singing harmony. And you might be singing harmony for a while, and maybe at some point you will move to leading songs, especially if that's your desire. You can put in the work and you can get to a place where you can lead songs. And there's definitely worship team leaders who are unfair in that development process, and they don't focus on everybody that they should be focusing on. But there's also another side of the coin to it too. But what can we do as worship team leaders? We can make sure that our team feels valued, that even in those seasons where the person isn't ready to lead a song yet, we make sure that we are intentional about connecting and communicating with them and saying, I really want you to lead someday. Like, these are the things that you need to work on. Once again, it goes back to clarity. I talk about clarity all the time, especially on my Q&A videos. It goes back to clarity. If you're clear with the person who has only been on your team for 6 months and they want to lead, more songs, to give them a clear path and say, this is the clarity that we need to communicate with. You're not quite there yet. You're not your vocal support isn't there quite enough to lead a song on Sunday, but we're going to work on that together, and we're going to reevaluate in 3 months and see where you're at. And I hope that one day as we work, I know that one day as we work together, you're going to get to a point where you can lead a song by yourself. And if you come at it with that to like the people on your worship team who really want to lead a song, they're going to feel valued in that. And this is just one specific situation. There's a bunch of other ways that people don't feel valued on a worship team. And I think ultimately that like underlies all these other things that we're about to see. Comment number 2 says, I've left a worship team because I felt like an employee before. I never felt so free after getting out of that situation. The leadership was so controlling. I think this comment was in response to one of my points in my original video, was that people leave because they feel like they're employees and not, I don't know what the word I used back then, but like not just volunteers, but like it's easy in leadership for us as worship leaders to take on like the role of the boss, and we have all of these expectations for ourselves, and we hold ourselves to a high standard. And I'm all for holding people to high standards, by the way, myself and my worship team members. At the same time, we do need to have some grace, especially if we are like full-time staff at the church, which not everybody is, but especially if we're full-time staff at the church, we have to realize that these people have other things going on in their lives, and they can't commit as much as we can commit, because this is our job. This is what we do all day, especially if you're full-time, even if you're part-time, even if you're volunteer. Like you are the leader of the ministry, so out of anybody, you probably care the most about it. And I just think of like during holiday seasons, like how hard we can push our teams, or we shouldn't do it, but we tend to push our teams. And some churches have like many services, and I'm not even like saying that in and of itself is a bad thing. There's a church, I can't remember what church it was, but I know they had like so many services on Christmas Eve, and they probably even had one like on Christmas Day. And it's like they didn't have the team to support that many services. And so they just burnt out their team. They were like, we're going to have 7 Christmas services. And it's like, yeah, but you've got one team, and now your worship team is going to be there all day on Christmas Eve and like on Christmas morning, and you think that's okay. That's not healthy for you as a leader, and it's not healthy for your team, especially who are volunteers. So we've got to be mindful of not making our team feel like employees. So how do we make them not feel like employees? Well, I think that just goes to like leadership in general. Any good boss doesn't make the people who work for them, which I'm not saying is what happens on a worship team, but any good boss doesn't make the people who work for them feel like they are working for them. And I think that goes to like, you feel like an employee when the person above you just tells you what to do all the time. They don't value your opinion. They have these demands on your time, and you have no say over whether you can do it or not, which is what this person said. They said the leadership was so controlling, right? We can't control our team. And that is the balance that we have to find as leaders in our worship ministry, and really in the church at large, is like we are in a leadership position. We're called to lead people, but the question is, how do we lead people? And we lead by example, and sometimes we have to have hard conversations with people about expectations, but it should never be like I am the boss, you work for me attitude, because that doesn't work. And I don't think it works in most things, unless you like work in a factory or something, and even then people don't enjoy it. The third reason, I think a lack of vision can be a huge problem, as I've seen it in my worship team. We have come from a large team for a 200-plus church to a skeleton crew. How did we get there? Slowly, over a few years of not addressing things, our worship pastor left for a better position because he was part-time. Not having trained anyone to step up, we struggled with several leaders. Fortunately, the core group was strong, so it didn't affect the quality of the music performance. However, it did affect the spiritual/personal aspects. Small concerns went on unaddressed, so they grew into big ones or bitterness. In the end, people started leaving one at a time, sometimes broken-hearted. We are 2.5 years in and on life support without any permanent leader in sight. What remains of that core band is still fighting to lead as examples and are trying to go alongside the new members to guide them, but are all growing weary. Also, as a result, or maybe independently, our church has shrunk, so we can't afford a full-time worship leader either, also feeding to the uncertainty and fragility of the situation. We are desperately praying for an upturn, so pray for us and keep on doing this. So in this comment, I feel like there's two reasons that people are leaving the worship team. Number one is not dealing with problems on the worship team. It's like allowing things to fester and eventually bubble over, boil over on our worship team, which is why you, as a worship team leader, if that is you, you've got to deal with problems as they come up. And it's not easy, it's not comfortable, but I mean, this is what I talk about all the time. Like, leadership is not an easy position, and we have to have hard conversations sometimes. And so when there is discord among team members, we've got to just be brave enough and bold enough to bring it up. We have to be willing to sit down with those people and say, hey, and like do this like as soon as you notice it. If you are noticing something like this on your team where two people are not getting along, you're the leader of the team. It's not going to fix itself, most likely. So after rehearsal sometime, say, can I talk to you two afterwards? And bring them together and say, I just sense like there's some animosity between you two. It seems like there's like conflict, and I just want to make sure that we keep an eye on that, because I want us to be able to serve in unity and to be able to serve well together. And I feel like there are some things that are getting in the way of that sometimes. So if you have that conversation with your team members, like as soon as it pops up, you just like end it before it starts really. That is going to be easier, although it is still difficult. That's going to be easier than if you wait 6 months and allow it to grow and grow and grow. Or if there's people on your team who aren't fulfilling the basic expectations, once again, borrowing from the last comment where we don't want to make people feel like employees, but it's still okay to have expectations for our team, showing up on time, being prepared. Those aren't unrealistic expectations. And like I said, we got to show grace and mercy for people and not work our people like they are employees, because they aren't. They're just volunteers, but they're still serving in the church, and we have a responsibility to the people of our church, so we need to have expectations that we are all held to, not just the worship team members, but the worship team leaders as well. But it's okay to have expectations, and when people aren't meeting those expectations, it actually frustrates the other people on the team, because they all know where the expectation should be. You should have your songs learned. We shouldn't have to wait for you to start rehearsal. And so if you as the leader don't deal with that, then it's just going to make the rest of your team frustrated, and then your team will shrink to the lowest common denominator as far as expectations go, because all the good volunteers will want to leave your team because nobody's dealing with this frustrating thing on the team, and they'll get frustrated eventually and leave, like is what happened, it sounds like, in this church. So not only that, but in this comment, there was a lack of leadership, and really what I just talked about is a symptom of the lack of leadership. But it sounds like, and I've seen this, once again, I'm going to keep referencing it because that's where my perspective comes from usually, is like there are a lot of worship teams who don't actually have a worship team leader. Like nobody has specifically designated somebody as the team leader, or the person who is the team leader is just confused about whether they're the leader or not. Like you need to have a leader who leads your worship ministry, because somebody has to have the authority, I'll use that word, to deal with the problems that come up. And if nobody ever has that authority, then the problems never get dealt with because nobody's sure if they can actually have these conversations or not. Because like I say in Real Talk all the time, if you're not the worship team leader, some of these problems aren't your problem to deal with. So don't go and talk to the people. But some worship team leaders don't know if they're able to have the conversation or not. So we need to be clear in our worship ministries who is the leader. So for this person who left the comment, they left this comment 3 years ago now. So, and this is Alexander, who comments on my videos. Like, still to this day, Alexander, if you are watching this video, reach out to me by email. I want to hear a follow-up of how it's going at your church. And I hope that things have gone better, and I hope that you have somebody who can lead your worship ministry well. Number 4, I will typically not stay on a worship team if there is consistent disorganization. Team members do not consistently take it seriously and personally prepare, and or there is an unwillingness to rotate players when other skilled players are available. When some team members seem to own their position, it kind of bothers me. So we kind of already talked about the making sure people feel valued thing, but I want to focus on the disorganized aspect of it, because this once again goes back to bad leadership, and disorganization in a worship team can take many forms. Number 1, it can just be the worship team members who are disorganized and they're not prepared for rehearsal, and you're spending like 3 hours at rehearsal learning songs that you should already know. But I think sometimes that comes from the leadership of the team, not always, but sometimes like that attitude is brought about by the leader of the team, and I could see that being very frustrating for a worship team member who's a volunteer, who's not an employee, like we already talked about, and they have a limited amount of time when it comes to serving on the worship ministry. And it's limited not in a way where it's like, I can only work on this for a half an hour a week or something, but it's like a normal amount of time. Like they're like, I'm going to put in the time during the week to learn the songs, and then I'm going to show up to rehearsal, and it should take an hour and a half, maybe, I don't know, but an hour and a half I think is a good amount of time for a worship rehearsal. Maybe 2 hours depending on how many songs you do, I don't know. But like I've reserved this amount of time, but it's like going way over that. And why is it going way over that? Not because my expectation is wrong, but simply because the leader and the other people on my team are disorganized. I would be very frustrated with that. And like that is like the one thing that as a leader we can control, how organized we are. And so to show up, I was going to say show up at rehearsal, prepared yourself, but even before that, like, what do we need to do to make sure that our teams are led well? We need to send out the songs in advance, and I'll let you decide what that period of time for you is. I recently started sending out my songs 2 weeks in advance to my team, and I've seen the benefit in that. It used to be like the week of, like I would give them time to prepare, but I've moved to 2 weeks in advance. Even that, they come to rehearsal prepared because they actually had time to learn the songs. And that was just me being more organized. So you send them the songs out 2 weeks in advance, send them chord charts, a recording to play along with. Like, these are the simple things that we can do to make sure that our team is equipped. And I would be so frustrated if I was on a team, and I have been, I don't know, I've actually been part of some pretty good worship teams where that's not usually a problem. But like once or twice, I think there have been times where I'm like, man, like, can you just be organized? Like, just send me out the songs in advance so I actually know them and we don't have to learn them at rehearsal, because nobody wants to learn songs at rehearsal. So worship leader, be organized. Number 5. Great video. I think it maybe goes without saying, but it seems important to mention that sometimes people just leave, despite the best efforts on the part of the ministry leader to love, serve, and lead their volunteers with excellence, passion, and Christ-likeness. I say this because I have agonized in the past over why so-and-so left the team. And I think that is, I don't think it goes without saying. I think it is important to say, especially for worship team leaders who are watching this video. Sometimes people just leave. I mean, we see this all the time in the church at large, right? If you are a leader in the church, you've seen people come and go. And you're like, I don't think I did anything wrong. I mean, there's always stuff that we could do better, and we want to evaluate, like, why did this person leave, so that we don't end up with a bunch of situations like we talked about in the first 4 points. Like, we want to make sure we're not disorganized. We want to make sure that we value our team members. We want to make sure that we don't treat them like employees, so on and so forth. Like, we want to evaluate when somebody steps away from the worship ministry. But at the same time, some people are just going to be unhappy. Like there is no perfect answer to things in the worship ministry because everybody has different opinions, and you can't make everyone happy. No matter how well you lead, there is always going to be somebody who comes in who thinks that the expectations are too high, who thinks that the expectations are too low, who thinks that you should sing more hymns, who thinks that you should stop singing as many hymns and start singing more contemporary songs, somebody who thinks you should play with click tracks, somebody who despises click tracks, and like so on and so forth. And obviously our job as a leader is to unite these people around a common purpose and mission, but sometimes people just aren't going to get it, unfortunately. And while there are always ways that we can improve as leaders, like this person said, sometimes people are just going to leave. And we need to remember that as worship team leaders. Now, if you want to make sure that you lead your worship team well, I think the best way to do it is to start with your worship rehearsal. I think that's like the foundational piece of your worship ministry because that is the thing that happens most often. And that's why I put together the worship rehearsal blueprint. In that, I will give you a step-by-step guide to the perfect worship rehearsal. It'll teach you how to lead your team well musically so that they're prepared to lead on Sunday, but also spiritually so that they grow closer to God, and relationally so that they grow closer to each other. And in that format of the structure of your worship rehearsal, you can intentionally focus on those 3 things and make sure that your team is led well. So if you're interested in that, check that out down in the description below. Other than that, thanks so much for joining me. Till I see you in the next video, keep leading worship well.